The UK continues to lead Europe on the scale and efficiency of the vaccine rollout. Of course, it's in our interest that everybody in Europe and elsewhere is vaccinated, but it's good to see Britain doing something right. And who better to break down the significance of the numbers than Professor David Spiegelhalter. He's a statistician and chair of Cambridge's Winton Centre for Risk and Evidence Communication. Professor, welcome back to Spectator TV. Let me begin with a general question. Is it right, in your view, to see vaccine policy in some ways is now the government's major economic policy?
Without this vaccine, I mean, heaven knows how we'd be able to get out of this epidemic, especially with the new variants coming along. So it must go absolutely hand in hand with opening up society and the rebuilding of the economy. And that's why the comparisons between what's happening in the UK and what's happening certainly in the rest of Europe become so interesting.
Tell us where we are with the vaccine now. As I understand it, quite early on, the British government, obviously taking scientific advice, decided that it would give priority to getting as many of the target groups as possible the first dose. It knew it would need a second dose and weeks later, but the idea was, rather than doing the first, then the second, to do as many first as possible, and then follow up with the second. That, I think, has been a vindicated strategy.
There were three bold decisions made at the beginning of the vaccine rollout, and strongly influenced by the scientific opinion from JCVI, the committee responsible. The first, in terms of the prioritization, which is strictly based on a statistical analysis of who is most at risk. And so there was an absolutely clear objective to save the maximum number of lives, and which is also the number of years of life lost as well. So complete focus on that. And that had three implications. First of all, who got the vaccine first. Secondly, that they wanted to get as many first jabs into as many arms as possible, with a delay on the second dose until 12 weeks. And this was very controversial, criticised by other countries as well. And thirdly, the idea that the AstraZeneca vaccine, although the trials had not included many people over 65, was fine to give to over 65s. Those three bold, controversial decisions have all been vindicated and have led to the staggering success of our vaccine rollout and the clear signs of its effectiveness now.
Now tell me, who have we done? Who is now covered by the vaccine, even if it's just the first dose, because I think that still gives you quite a high percentage of efficacy. And who's going to be next?
Well, we worked down through, the people in care homes, then the over 80s, the over 70s, people on the clinically extremely vulnerable list, and so on. And so very high percentages in these groups have been vaccinated. We're now down to the 60s. I got myself done, which is great, just as part of the group. And now we're working down to the first 9 groups, will bring us down to 50-year-olds and people who, right down to 18, who have some medical condition. So those are being done now with the aim that those first 5 groups, those first 9 groups will be done certainly by, well, they've sort of said by mid-April, I think, but I think they could easily be done before that. And then, obviously, it has been contested who gets it next. Should it be prioritized in terms of some occupations? But it looks like they're still deciding to work down through the age groups. And following this scientific discovery from a statistical analysis that age is the absolutely dominant factor. Your risk of catching and dying from the virus doubles for every 6 years you're older. And so that I think, again, is a very science-based conclusion.
And that would, from what you say then on that statistical basis, Professor, it would probably make sense for the government to continue on the trajectory that it's on, in other words, being age-driven.
Yeah, I think that's what they are driven. Clearly, it's very delicate because I can see that certain professions we know, very public-facing professions, do have a higher risk. But then, if you were going to do that, you'd want to do taxi drivers, you'd want to do public transport drivers. All sorts of people would be then sort of demanding to be put up in the queue. So they have gone for essentially keeping it quite simple. I mean, they should have done men before women, for example, of the same age, but they've tried to keep it as simple as possible, and I can understand that. It's a bit like the tier system, which they don't want to go back to because the complexity of that gave rise to so many arguments that I can see they're preferring to keep things just simple and just say that's the way it's going. And I think what's also remarkable, there's no queue jumping. You cannot just get this vaccine. You cannot even, no matter it's not like getting a test. If you pay money, you could get a test. I feel really proud of that. I feel deeply moved by the way we're all standing in our queue and we're getting our jabs.
And you can't buy it. The rich
No,
can't buy it.
I don't think you can. I wouldn't dare anyway on the black market. I mean, who knows what would be in the vial?
Yes, exactly. Are we getting evidence that in addition to preventing going down with the COVID, particularly going down severely to an extent of hospitalization, the evidence for that now seems for the vaccine's efficacy is quite strong. Is there evidence too that it also prevents transmission?
Yep, it's growing. Now, I mean, fortunately, the biggest effect is for the nastiest things. So we know that hospitalisation just from one dose from this fantastic Scottish study showed a 85% reduction in hospitalisations from Pfizer, 94% from AstraZeneca. I should add, there's no difference between those numbers.
Yes.
So,
yes.
it makes all
statistically, there's no difference.
No, there's no difference at all. If you look at as we statisticians would look at the margins of error around those numbers, they completely overlap. So there's no basis for saying one is better for the other on the basis of that data. That's hospitalization. That means the protection against dying will be even higher than that. Very likely, we still haven't not had that many deaths following vaccination, so it's very difficult we're not too confident about assessing that exactly, but I'm sure it's above 90% efficacy against death, against infection, against some disease it'll be a bit lower than that. It looks like about 80 in the 80%, and against infection maybe 60-70% protection against infection, growing evidence for that. But it does depend on the variant, possibly. So though there is protection against infection, but even greater protection against the more severe outcomes, which is what we're most interested in.
It's encouraging to see Britain doing well in this, given all the mistakes that were about to be made around this time last year, which set us back. Of course, it was uncharted territory for everybody then. But of course, and of course, you can, I'm sure there's some people in Britain will take a certain comfort from the fact that Europe is making a bit of mess of things in some areas. But of course, we can't really be free until our friends in Europe are also on the same trajectory as we are. And they're quite far behind, Professor. I mean, I'm coming to you from France. They've only done 7%. And the president's attacks on AstraZeneca have given the already quite a strong anti-vax movement in France a reason for not taking the AstraZeneca. There are, as we speak, about 1 million unused AstraZeneca doses.
This is a complete tragedy, and I'm not sure, it's not very polite to refer to a president of a great country as an idiot, but really, that frankly is when he said, oh, it's quasi ineffective in over 65s, it was both totally wrong, grossly misleading, and has had apparently a big effect. People don't want this AstraZeneca vaccine, which we're now seeing in real world is doing fantastically well. So this is tragic. This is costing lives. Vaccines, it's not like going into, Superdrug and deciding what headache tablet I'm going to get. If you don't get this, you're not going to get a vaccine for some time. And so I've got relatives in Italy in their 70s, absolutely no sign of a vaccine coming for them yet. I think this is appalling. And now, in Britain, we're working right down through, as we've heard, through younger and younger people, and this is having a huge effect. So as you said, well, we want everyone to be vaccinated so that we can restore some confidence in traveling and moving around. So this is tragic, and it's going to cost a very large number of lives in mainland Europe, I think.
It was more damaging, I think, in France than people even in Britain realized, because attacking the AstraZeneca one, which is the one that doesn't need special cold storage, unlike the Pfizer one, and yet France does not have a nationwide chain of the cold storage that could handle the Pfizer. So actually the AstraZeneca would have been better for them because you don't need that cold storage. But even what we tend to think of, Professor, as the more level-headed, more pragmatic Germans, they've kind of gone down this route.
Yeah, it was their regulatory agencies. The European Medicines Agency did approve AstraZeneca for over 65s on the same basis as we did, that there was no evidence that it was not effective. And a lot of, in a way, indirect evidence that it was, just from what we know about vaccines, what we saw about the immune response it generated in older people. And so, you know, in a way, the precautionary approach would be to give it to the over 65s, because otherwise this is going to cost lives. But whereas many of the national regulatory agencies in Germany and elsewhere thought, oh, we're going to be cautious because we haven't got evidence that it works, so we're not going to approve it. Well, no, that, you know, they're changing their minds. Yes. Too late. You know, they brought up distrust in this treatment and in this vaccine, and it's going to take a long time to reverse that public opinion. So it's a total disaster in terms of the processing of the scientific evidence and the communication of it. And as I said, this country's made, you know, one mess up after another in many ways. But it's really good at this stage with the new variant spreading, you know, now throughout the rest of Europe, that we have at last done something right.
Final question, Professor, for today. If the rollout continues to be the success it is, and the good news about the power, the efficacy of the vaccines continues to come in too, should the government consider a quicker exit from lockdown? Or should it just be cautious? June isn't that far away. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. What would you advise?
You know not to ask me what the government should do, because I'm not going to say. I have said before, a number of times, that we are coming up to a massive argument, because the rate at which deaths, for example, are coming down in this country, I don't think was better than anyone would have predicted. I think we're going to see, I'm absolutely certain, I think now before Easter, no excess deaths in this country, that the total death rate will be below the 5-year average, and there will be enormous demands to speed up the release. But I do think that we've got to be very cautious. And I think, I mean, they did say data, not dates, and then said a whole lot of dates. Really? I mean, come on. No, but I think, so I'm going to say that they should be looking at the data and being cautious. Let's see the result of opening up schools. Let's see the result at each step. And let's see what happens. And to be cautious, because with the new variants coming along, there's a real risk of a big blow up. We have protected the most vulnerable, but if it takes off among the unvaccinated, we could still see a huge impact on the health, and we'd have to then start closing things up again, and they don't want to do that.
We certainly don't, Professor. Professor, we're going to have to close up, but as always, it's been a pleasure having you on Spectator TV. Thank you for joining us
Thank you
today.
very much.
That's Cambridge University's David Spiegelhalter speaking to us, one of our country's top statisticians, if not the top statistician, in fact. I'm still working with my abacus, so I'm not really quite in that league.